So my name is MJ Petroni, and I'm here to talk about agency in agencies, or agency and innovation. Basically, how do you deal with the power dynamics that come from asking people to make this big jump that Denise was just talking about how you get people to say, I see something else as possible and I'd like to do that, but we're in the middle of what's already going on. How do we do it? So we're going to touch on a few things. What I call the 4 seasons of innovation, so what it is to plant a seed and have it take root. The power dynamics that come up in a change or innovation process, and how to build rapport, credibility, possibility, and alignment in conversation. So this all comes from this big thing where everyone's saying, be epic, do this big stuff, change everything, right? And we all signed up to change the world. And we've got these really complex set of systems that are already connected, that have been there a long time, and they're a mess. But the people who put them in know a lot more about them than we do, hopefully. And then we're asked to take on mission-critical systems, and if you snip the wrong wire, everything breaks, right? It's not an easy conversation to have. So this, from my own experience, I do work with, we're talking to people about this pervasive access to the web and what that means for the crisis of the commons of building infrastructure, and what happens when you talk about the Internet of Things and what we call then the social network of things, where all these connected devices have the ability to make decisions absent human intervention, like driverless cars. We get asked to talk to people about how do you quantify human emotion in a technological system, and should you, and is that appropriate, right? And then what happens when the humans and the machines get complex and interconnected, and maybe you can't even tell the difference between one and the other. We even get to talk about the geek rapture, which is what we call the singularity. It's when all the developers get uploaded and the rest of us sit around and waste away in our bodies. So there's a lot of implications to all this. So everyone's like, wait, what does this have to do with what I do right now? And that's probably the experience a lot of agencies have when they first sit down with someone who's talking to them about modernizing their technology systems. And they're having it within their own agencies, when one side of the agency is trying to modernize and the other is just trying to get their job done, right? So let's talk about the seasons of innovation that happen, and specifically the power dynamics there. The quick version of this is that the winter, you could be saying, is about plowing the fields and being ready to plant new seeds, which means you have to think about what seeds are you going to plant. In the spring, it's all about which seeds have you planted and which are starting to take root, and sometimes you can't even see what's happening under the ground. In summer, it's which ideas are actually taking root, which ones need to be pruned back to make room for the rest. And in the fall, it's about how do you get the most from all that effort that you put in? How do you harvest the most? Okay, so some human elements to this. Each season requires different skills and decision types, but as we know, swapping people in and out of teams feels difficult. As those seasons progress, or you go through the process of introducing or growing something new, there are fewer choices and higher costs. So people get real nervous, especially around the summer, when you're like, put a lot of money into this, but I haven't seen results yet. It's because you haven't had that first harvest, the first successful implementation of it fully pan out. And most teams that you encounter, maybe even 95% of the people that you're going to encounter in these agencies are focused on the fall or maintenance phase. They were hired to keep the status quo and to do it really well and to get optimization out of that, okay? They're not set up to necessarily launch all of these new things, but they have a lot of valuable information to offer you, to Denise's points earlier. When we talk about this, it's vulnerable. It's hard for a lot of people to say that they need help, especially if their sense of identity or self-worth is wrapped up around helping others. And you have to understand that trust and connection are earned, right, through appropriate vulnerability. So if you come in and you have all the right ideas, it doesn't go over right away. There's not an imperfect moment in there where someone gets to bond with you. So it's difficult to create space for that. It sounds like you're doing good work with the design workshops and some of the other engagements there. And what we've also learned is that to create something new inside an organization absolutely requires touching on shame and guilt. So you cannot talk about creating a new thing without acknowledging that the current thing isn't working well enough. And that's hard because people probably have tried to fix it before you got there, okay? So you're touching on someone's perhaps life's work and asking them to entrust you, this young whippersnapper probably, with something that is going to potentially turn everything upside down for a while. So that means that you're talking about authority. And speaking of authority, I'm going to check around time here. All right, great. So when you talk about authority, right, when you talk about change, it means that you're talking about someone is making a decision. And usually when we hear that thing about decision, the first thing that comes up is about authority. And really this is about power. So how many people here like the word power? right? How many of you did a little like, when I said power, right? Okay? So when we talk about power, the ability to have something because, to create a new thing, what we usually actually hear is power over or power under, okay? These are power dynamics where one person or one group is forcing another, or another group is putting up with or succumbing to another, okay? That's very, very different than this concept of power with. Power with is meeting with someone and together bringing your forces to bear on creating something or maintaining something or protecting something. So how do you actually make that real in a conversation so that people don't feel like you're exerting a power over dynamic, nor are you doing the power under thing that is about acquiescing to an authority that maybe needs help but doesn't know how to ask for it? So let's talk about a couple dynamics here. This is going to be a little bit of a pop quiz. One dynamic is compliance, the idea that you need to do what the rules say. A couple others, buy-in, sabotage, surrender or acquiescence. Okay, I gave that one away. Alignment, apathy, and resistance. All right, let's do a little thing though. Where does this end up on the power dynamic, right? Of power over, power under, or power with? Okay, quick question. How many of you think compliance has to do with power over? How many of you think compliance has to do with power under? All right, so I'm going to say for now it's about under because there's a force being exerted. All right, buy-in. Most people would put this in a power with dynamic. Anyone have a quick question or a quick statement about why buy-in might actually be a power over dynamic? Popcorn, anyone?
Because it means you've convinced other people to do what you want to do.
Yeah, you're convincing them. So the person who has the ability to buy in or not is saying, oh, I'm in this, I get what's in it for me or my organization. And so you're constantly in this conversation of convincing someone, which means you're not actually in the with part of it, right? So it feels like sales. Sabotage, this power over conversation, right? So the rest are fairly obvious. Apathy, resistance, all that kind of stuff. So the only one that in our terms, and there's a little bit of jargon here, but in our terms that we say is actually a power with conversation is that alignment piece. Now, alignment is not the same as agreement. Alignment is actually greater than agreement. And the difference is that agreement is, I get what's in it for me. Buy-in is like the best you get with agreement. Alignment is, I get what's in it for the vision of the organization. And it's a difference because the difference is buy-in is still kind of all put up with it, and alignment is an ownership of the decision, as if the person had made it themselves. So if they can go and have a discussion about it and they don't say, well, because they said this and because they say that, that starts to be ownership of the decision. Okay, that's all great and well, Captain Obvious, right? So when we talk about this, it's the difference between people who are able to see what's in it for the vision or not. And in order to do that, you have to have rapport and credibility with the person you're speaking about because you're dealing with something bigger than an individual decision. So let's unpack a little bit about how you actually build alignment in a conversation early in the process. How many people in here are involved in the initial conversations with your partners? Only 3? How about the conversation that comes right after that? How many of you are in the kickoff conversations? How many of you are in the kickoff conversations? All right, keep your hands up. So we've got, what, a third, half of the room. How many of you are like, I'm awesome at that, and people always leave better leaving those conversations? Okay, that's good, right? So the rest of you, though, when you're either, if you weren't in that group that kept the hands up all the way through, or if you weren't directly in that conversation, the truth is those conversations around alignment are not like a one-time thing. It's a practice within the organization, and it's a practice in the process. So first stage is what? We're going to talk about what, why, how, and the ask. So what? The what is not what you think the problem is. The what is demonstrating empathy and curiosity about people's existing experience, about their existing problems and the vision of the organization. What do they say the problem is? What do they say is the thing that they're facing or that they can't solve for? If you jump to something further that's your perspective on it, you're going to lose them because you never actually had a conversation with them. I wouldn't come up on the stage not having conversations with several of you prior to try and get at least some sense of what your organization is dealing with. Otherwise, it'd just be me coming up here and telling a story about some random organization, right? So the difference is not, I've got the answer, it's what do you need, all right? And you demonstrate it in such a way that they end the conversation with this person saying, they get me. They get what I'm facing, they get what I'm dealing with. And the outcome is rapport. Next one is a question that I have for you. What are your practices for listening? So how do you listen to organizations, right? So just toss out popcorn a few terms that you use or practices that you have for listening to people.
What I think I hear you saying is.
It can also be tools in your toolkit. What? Say that again? Okay. Anything else? Ooh, good. I didn't hear all of it, but I heard perspectives in there. Let's say that again. Retrospectives, okay. Yeah, persona modeling is another one of these where you're listening to what the use case is for a user that's actually touching the service. So your partners have collective hundreds or maybe even thousands of years of experience with this problem. So the question I have for you is to make sure that you build into your process, or no, that's not a question, that's an imperative. My question is, how can you build into your process practices for surfacing your own assumptions? How can you make sure that the questions you ask don't bake in too many assumptions about what government is or what these agencies are or what your partners already do or don't know? How can you check your own bias in that process to be as open-minded and open-hearted as possible? And then how can you create space for people to express that they may be feeling some shame or guilt or embarrassment about not having solved it before you? Because they may be doing this digital service thing, but really they're doing a job for someone who's a citizen out there. And all of a sudden, with all this digital stuff, they may not be able to do the job as well as they thought they could. So that's sometimes hard. How did these people get to share their experience with you, and what are your practices for listening and empathy? All right, the next one is about credibility. So this is where everyone loves to jump. Look at all these great things we can do. Look at the reasons why they're great. But you have to be cautious about this. What you want to leave people with when you talk about the why of their problem is a point of view or mindset that says why that problem might be occurring. But it has to be about their problem, not your perspective on the problem, of your idea of what needs to be fixed. So that people at the end of it say, there's a new point of view or a new angle that's introduced that says, they get it. They actually get what's going on here, either in a way that they already thought of but don't have the tools to implement, right? So that's where you're partnering to do a particular thing, or in a consultative or strategic role where you're able to help them navigate something because you have a new point of view on what's going on. So again, how would you solve something here? Try and think of your why as distinct from the solutions. So this would be because government agencies don't have a digital services process, or because they don't have development operations, or because they don't have a live feedback loop from their sites, the analytics to help them understand what's going on. These are some of your whys, okay, based on what I'm seeing on your site. So if you can emphasize your points of view in a way that is about how you empower people to finish and solve for their problems rather than what you think their problems are, you can start to notice where the difference is and help with the education gap. The possibility stage, or how, is not the ask. Okay, this is not, okay, great, we all agree that there's a problem, we agree on some of why it's going on. It's not jumping immediately, so will you sign with us in whatever form that takes for you. It's actually having someone see a new possibility, to your point about the art of the possible. So having them see a new possibility for moving forward, as distinct from the actions they have to commit to do it. So that they can see, oh, I see this as possible, and have it be separate from the conversation, do I want to do this with 18F, or do I want to do it this specific way? Most people try and go to the ask right away about, will you work with me this way, or will you commit to this development operation approach, or will you commit to agile, without actually checking to see if someone actually gets how the pieces would fit together and believes that it's possible. If you try and implement something, even if they say yes in that moment, if they don't believe it's possible in their culture or see how it would be possible, that mindset being missing will kill the project. So from a shared mindset, people align that there's a possible course of action in line with the organization's vision and values, okay? Don't jump to the ask. You have to get people to agree that it could work before you ask them to align on parts that they have to make work. And the ask is the very obvious piece that everyone wants to jump to. Okay, what's the next steps? What's our action? What are we going to do here? So when we look at this, how many of you have heard of wicked problems? Okay, it's a design thinking piece that shows up around those conversations. the argument is there's three kinds of problems. There's simple problems called, I know what it is, and I know why it's not working, and therefore what the solution might be. We just need to do it. The complex problem is, I know what the problem is, but I don't know why it's happening, or I don't know what the solution's going to be. So we can't proceed until we figure that out. And the wicked problem is, I don't know what the problem is. It just doesn't feel right. And so that shows up as symptoms, like our customers are frustrated, the people that work with us are frustrated, we don't know why. Or the site keeps crashing, we have no idea where to start. Okay, those wicked problems require a much longer period to do all those questions we talked about, the what, why, and how, because you have to understand the mindsets and get those synced up before you can even start to unpack the problem, and then you have to go through that whole process again about some of the solutions. Many of the things you're being asked to do, like do it faster, better, cheaper, quicker, better technology all at once, like that kind of thing, those tend to be questions of wicked problems because there are so many variables at play. And so the thing to pay attention to is that if it's a simple problem where everyone understands the problem and the solution, the risk is that you're going to become outsourced to. That the problem will just shift to being on your plate as opposed to building capacity internally. A complex problem that you need to pay attention to is that you have a shared mindset, because if they don't have the aha moments already before you get there about why the problem's occurring and thus what the solution might be, you have to make sure their mindset's the same so that they start seeing how this could be solved and actually understand the why of the problem. So it's going to take some time to build that. And a wicked problem, what you're going to really have is no matter how great that project team is that's kicking it off, the culture's ability to grapple with that issue ongoingly is going to be pretty limited, because the whole culture probably does not have the right mindset and point of view to make that possible. So as we go forward and we talk about all of these stages, I'm going to leave with a couple key questions for each of the seasons of innovation, as we put it. In the winter, when you're dealing with this question of culmination, it's what has to go away or what will we need to plant. So when you meet a project team that is retiring an old system, the questions that you're focusing on are about retirement, of course, but also about what things kind of have to die to make room for this, which might be some long-held old beliefs or processes. In the spring, the question is usually, what are we going to launch? So what seeds are we going to plant? And what if the seeds we plant don't make it? So how are you going to call a particular strategy dead and another one is living when they haven't made it to fruition yet? There's a very difficult conversation for organizations. If you had 10 pilots going with them, 9 can't make it and 1 can, how are you going to make that call? Important thing is that at each of these seasons, you're also dealing with the change in the talent makeup of the team. Different people need to be on a team to launch an idea than they need to have when you're scaling, right? And when you're scaling into something where it needs to be done in day-to-day work in that agency, it's a different group of people. And it's vulnerable at each of those points because you have to talk about who's coming and who's going from the team. And people feel, obviously a little tender about that. Finally, in the summer, we have basically the question of what are we going to prune back? What are we going to do about pests? The organizational thing that is going to derail the project. And then the final, of course, piece that we all want to get to, and this isn't to scale here, is when everything has been built up, how do we get the most results for the money? Oh, wow, my cyborg self just reminded me we're done. So how do we get the most yield for the money for the investment in this project? And how do we actually prepare for the next phase of building up, the next iteration, the next version? This might be years that it's in this realization phase. So with that, real quickly, we talked about power in organizations, the relationship to decision making, the what, why, how, and ask portions, and the seasons of innovation. So I wanted to thank you for your service and for everything you're doing to build this in the digital services age. Thank you. Thank you.